The year 1995. A year of great fashion, great shows, and two young lovebirds who were about to embark on a two-way trip to hell and back. Aaron Drake was a 25-year-old safety major who just graduated from Central Washington University. His wife, Deborah Drake, was a 20-year-old education major at the same school. The two met one fateful day in October 1993 on a volleyball court. 8 months later, they were married in a Federal Way Seventh-day Adventist church. The two had it all: amazing friends, a loving family, and a quaint apartment in North Puyallup. They then decided to throw it all away for a job opening at Occidental Petroleum, all the way in backwater Lake Charles, Louisiana. Little did they know, this was the last breath of fresh air they would take for 7 years on their epic migration to hell and back.
I'm Aaron Drake.
Hi, I'm Deborah Drake.
And this is my story.
In one word, how would you describe your trip to the South?
Hell. Hell.
Aberdeen with heat, humidity, and alligators.
In March of 1995, the two migrated down to Lake Charles separately, as Aaron had to get the house ready beforehand. When he drove to get Deborah from the airport, they had to drive through Main Street to get to their place. After seeing the many rundown and boarded-up shops and businesses that were ravaged by the oil crisis of the early 80s, Deborah immediately began to cry.
Yeah, I got off the plane and we drove down Main Street and I was just bawling. And I just turned to him and said, "Where have you brought me?" It was horrible.
The two lived in Lake Charles for a grand total of 13 months, and during that time the depression was immediately beginning to set in. The two knew no one in Lake Charles. All their friends and family were back home, but nothing compared to their first Christmas. They had little to no money to buy presents for each other, so they just agreed not to, and their Christmas tree was the saddest excuse for a tree they had ever seen. For one, it died way before Christmas, and on Christmas Eve they had to remove it from their house because it was a fire hazard. Upon taking it outside, they set it down and thousands of little brown dried up pine needles fell to the ground. The tree was dead, just like their dreams. Aaron tried to get involved with the community once, so he briefly became the kickin' chicken for the parade. They were fed up with living in that humid swamp town with all its interesting wildlife and people, so they decided they needed to move somewhere else. What were some cultural differences you noticed?
Well, where they would get their food, they were very resourceful. Like they would go out into the ditch in their front yard to get some kind of crustacean to eat for dinner.
They wanted to move home. This was a stretch though, because Washington was a long way away, but there was a new job opening right in Houston, Texas, so they took what little possessions they had and migrated their way west. The two migrated to Houston with little to no difficulties. They arrived at their apartment and were very happy at first. The Las Palmas apartments looked almost like a resort from the outside, but on the inside, it was so bug-infested and run down it might as well have been called the Las Cucarachas apartments.
They were everywhere. The cockroaches, they were behind the towels in the bathroom. They were in the kitchen. You never knew when you were going to run into them. So they scared you. They'd pop out of everywhere. And we're not talking about little cockroaches. We're talking about huge cockroaches, this big.
The bugs were almost as bad as their upstairs neighbor. This man's heavy-set body and loud footsteps gifted him the name Ivan the Gorilla from Deborah and Aaron. He worked such strange hours that sometimes his lumbering feet were heard in the middle of the night. The two were fed up with apartment life, so they decided to buy a house. They had finally decided on a nice house on Pleasant Plains in Friendswood, Texas. How much nicer could it get? Well, the former owners made the smart decision of potty training a baby kitten the week before Aaron and Deborah moved in. Not only did the house have large amounts of cat poop and pee around, but the former owners gave them the gracious housewarming gift of fleas. Yes, the cat had fleas, and now they were all over the carpet.
It was quite a task. There were fleas in every room. They were bouncing all over the place. We basically had to turn our house into a mini Hanford to get rid of them.
After many attempts at getting rid of their tiny pests, they finally did the job, and after almost a year, they were finally able to live bug-free. But their time to relax was not long, because soon after, Deborah became pregnant.
So I was student teaching at the time. I was just getting ready to finish my undergraduate, and I don't know, I'd been having like really sore gums and just not feeling very well, and I don't know, found out I was pregnant.
And so on April 28th, 1999, a small little devil named Amelia Drake was brought into the world, and since now they had a kid, they wanted more than ever to be back home in Washington. But it was hard to get all the way up there, so they took the next best thing. Fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. The migration over was strenuous because they couldn't fly with a newborn baby, so they had to drive the whole way. The three then had to stay in yet another bug-infested apartment, but only for a little while. Soon they bought a house, and luckily it didn't come with any uninvited guests this time. Things were looking up, but as we know, that never lasts long. On Amelia's first birthday, she began to get a little sick. She was sneezing, she had a fever, and worst of all, she was puking. And since it was her first birthday, everyone wanted to hold her and hug her and kiss her. This was a bad combo. The next day, almost everyone was completely sick. My grandparents couldn't drive back home because they were throwing up so much. Deborah was literally stuck in the bathroom because she couldn't leave without losing her lunch. And Aaron, let's just say it was coming out the other end. Not a proud time in the Drake household.
Yeah, I'm still going through counseling for that. I really don't want to talk about it.
Shortly after, Deborah got pregnant again, this time with a god. And since they really wanted to get back home, they began to sell their house and buy one in good old Washington. Aaron got a job up there and they began to get everything ready. Deborah was planning to be induced on September 12th, 2001, and it's a good thing they didn't choose the day before. On September 11th, 2001, it was horrible, as you all know. The housing market in Las Vegas even crashed, just in time. The nation was shocked, and Amelia even swore for the first time. Deborah, however, was mostly focused on getting the baby out of her.
I was mainly just mad there was nothing on TV because I was sitting around waiting for this kid to come out and I had nothing to do. I had to do crossword puzzles and stuff. So boring.
And yes, on September 12th, 2001 at 6:30 p.m., a legend was born, and it was time to migrate back up to Washington after all these years. The drive up was horrible because newborn babies can't go on airplanes. It was a long ride, with many troubles along the way, but in the end, it was worth it. After all of this struggle, after all of this hell, they were finally back. Aaron had to accept a job with a $17,000 pay cut. Deborah wasn't able to work immediately, and they had to live with my grandparents for a while, but it all worked out. They bought a nice house in Covington, and they've lived there ever since. They migrated over 5,182 miles to 3 different states and over most of the country. It just goes to show, maybe going through a little bit of hell is all it takes for you to really get close to someone.
Well, it was a real experience and a journey, but I think a lot of good came out of it.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
Yes, it was wonderful. We still love each other.
Ew.